Great. Well, welcome to this talking point. Delighted that this one is a Q&A session with our Chief Executive, Seyi Obakin. In terms of format, we are going to first of all hear from Seyi, who's going to give us an introduction to Centrepoint, and then we will go straight into the Q&A. We do have some questions already submitted from some of you, which is great, so thank you for that. And if you have more questions that you would like to pose at this point, please do pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. If you, we won't interrupt Seyi, we will do the Q&A after he's finished speaking, so we will get to the questions later on down the line. As I said, it's a real delight to see so many of you joining this session today. Thank you for that, but also importantly, thank you so much for all the amazing support that you've given Centrepoint over the recent weeks, months, years. Some of you I know have been hugely generous, particularly through the COVID crisis, and we are hugely grateful for your support. I'm hoping we won't have any tech issues. If you do have any issues, Claire is on hand, so do pop something into the chat if you experience any tech issues. That would be great. We have also slightly lengthened this session. We felt it was a good opportunity for supporters to ask Seyi their questions and get those responded. So we are actually going to run through to 1:45. If for any reason you need to leave before then, please do. Don't feel obliged to stay for the whole thing if you've got other things at past. But we will be lengthening the session slightly to make sure we get through questions as best we can. If there are any questions that we're unable to answer today just because of time constraints, then we will come back to you with answers to those questions by email after this session has completed. Okay. Great. Well, with no further ado, I am absolutely delighted to welcome our Chief Executive Officer, Seyi Obakin. Thank you so much for being with us today. Delighted to pass over to you for a bit of an introduction, and then, as I say, we've got some questions for you in due course. Over to you, Seyi. Thank you.
Thank you, Di. But I think my starting point really is to thank you all so much for your wonderful support over many years, but in particular in this last 6 months, which have been really turbulent. And I'll come back to the last 6 months in a moment. A lot of you would know, because you'd have heard it from us, that the number of young people who become homeless in our country is just unacceptably high. Last year, 110,000 young people approached their local authorities asking for help because they were homeless. So that's a big number. And a lot of those young people have all kinds of other issues going on in their lives, which make their situation rather difficult. And it is that context in which this pandemic has happened for young people. So the pandemic was a challenging time for us at Centrepoint. Very early on, we set ourselves 2 principles to guide what we would do. One was that we wanted to ensure that all of our services remained open and were safe for the young people who were there. So no young person has to leave any of our services and become homeless because of the pandemic. And the second one was that we needed, in order to keep those services safe, we needed to ensure that our staff were looked after and that they were safe themselves, that they could go in and come out safely without fear. So we had, I would say, 5 immediate challenges right at the beginning of the pandemic. One was money. How do we keep all this work going at a time when we could no longer run the fundraising events we depended on? Food, how do we keep young people fed if we're asking them to be locked down and we don't want them to break the lockdown rules? 3, how do we find the right protective equipment for our staff and indeed for young people who are living together in big places? at a time when there was such scarcity of that protective equipment. 4, how do we manage young people who might need to self-isolate or go into quarantine because they have caught the virus? And how do we ensure that, particularly in large hostels, how do we ensure that if one young person catches the virus, that doesn't become an outbreak in which all other young people in the service were affected? And then there's some things about staff as well. How do we keep spirits up, keep people motivated to want to keep coming into work? And it was a serious challenge to us. I want to say a big thank you to all of you on the call who responded so fabulously to our coronavirus appeal. I can't tell you how critical that was for us to just keep our services open and do some of these things that I have talked about. Of course, we know that the virus is still around. The pandemic is not over. It's going to carry on for some time. So we are holding ourselves, judging ourselves still by those 2 principles, even though some of the boundaries are changing now. For instance, now that young people are allowed to be out and about a bit more, how can we ensure that they are able to get tested rapidly? Those are the kind of challenges that we have now, so that we can identify who needs to self-isolate and who doesn't need to self-isolate. And that is particularly important for those very large hostels. And so we will continue to tackle the challenges that the virus throws at us in that sort of way. But we've also got to be thinking long-term. What is the future going to be like for youth homelessness? Centrepoint has been around for 50 years. And I know that when it was founded, the founders didn't expect, they didn't think that 50 years on, the problem will get worse. And that's exactly what has happened. And so looking forward for me, our challenge must be in this next 50 years of Centrepoint, how do we ensure that young people don't suffer the same challenges with homelessness that we have seen in the last 50 years? I believe passionately that youth homelessness is not inevitable, that it can be ended. What role would we play, Centrepoint, in making that vision, ending youth homelessness, a reality? And I think this really matters. It matters because, young people are the future. And I'm exercised by this thought that every young person deserves a chance in their lives to be successful. How can we ensure that our society is one that gives those young people the chance that they deserve? How can we ensure that our society takes care of the most vulnerable of us? Because frankly, the furthest down that we're all willing to allow the weakest of us to fall is also the furthest down that each of us can fall. And that is the reality. So I do think that this matters, and it matters a great deal. So by way of an opening then, I'm really grateful to have your support. It is what keeps us going. Literally, it is what keeps us going. And I'm delighted to be here and happy to take comments and questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Seyi. So lovely to hear your thoughts on where we've come from and where we're going to. Hugely appreciated. I've just been asked to remind myself as much as you that we are not taking questions through the microphone on this session. So if you do have questions for Seyi, please do pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That would be great. Okay, Seyi, we're going to kick off then in terms of the Q&A with some questions that were posed prior to the session. And the first one comes from Barbara, who asks about how Centrepoint selects young people that it supports and what age range we focus on.
So I would say that there are 4 routes by which young people access the range of services, and it's a wide range of services that Centrepoint offers. One route is through the Centrepoint helpline. That's not a selective route. Any young person facing homelessness anywhere in the country can ring the helpline. 0808 800 0661 is the number, and they will get the advice and the support that they need about how to avoid homelessness. So that route is not selective. Anywhere you are in the country, you can ring the helpline, you will get support and you will get advice. The second route, which operates predominantly in Manchester, is for young people just to come through our doors. That too, obviously, is a non-selective route. Young people can just come in. In Manchester, we don't just do street work, supporting young people to move off the streets into accommodation, but we effectively replace the council and we deliver the whole package of assessing and supporting homeless young people from that first conversation through the various services we offer into helping them to have a home and a job. So that's the second route. You just walk through the doors. The third route is through one of our supported housing services, which most of you would know as our beds. And the vast majority of young people who end up in those beds come through local authority channels. And this is a selective process because we are identifying young people who are suitable for each service in collaboration with the local authority. And what I mean by each service is that our services all have different characters. There are services that are focused on young people who have very complex needs. And there are services at the other end of the scale who are focused on young people who don't have those complex needs. And we try as best as we can to accommodate young people in the services that are right for them. So that's a selective process that is done in collaboration with a local authority. And then the last route, the fourth one, which we're currently developing, is in our independent living services. That is relatively new to us, but it is also a selective route because that is only for young people, who can live independently, they have a job or they can get a job, and they are homeless or at risk of being homeless. And we can offer them this provision that would mean that they can have genuinely affordable accommodation. And when I talk about genuinely affordable, I'm not talking about affordable rent, which is 80% of the market. I'm not even talking about social rent, which is roughly 60% of the market. I'm talking about rent that is linked to their income. So our objective is that no young person living in any of our independent living provision will be required to pay more than 40% of whatever their income is. Whether their income is £8,000 a year or £18,000 a year or 80,000, actually no one would earn £80,000 and be in that service. They will be required to pay no more than 40%. So that's the fourth route. Those four routes are open to any young person, the ones that are non-selective, the ones that are selective. That's the criteria by which we choose. We work with young people from the ages of 16 to 25. So that's our age range. I have to say that age range is wide. The reality is that actually in the last few years, we're finding that young people are getting younger and younger when they approach us. And so we're seeing young people predominantly arriving at 17, 18, and 19 years of age. But we can work with up to 25 years old.
Great. Thank you, Seyi. And there's a linked question that's come through around university bursaries. It's really fantastic that Centrepoint commits to supporting those people who have the opportunity to go to university. The question is around how we choose who benefits from our university bursary service. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that whole journey actually starts with the young person and their support worker. So actually the support worker is helping the young person to frame what their own aspiration is and why it is that they want to go to university. So if a young person wants to go to university, then they apply for the bursary scholarship. They must submit a written application. That application is vetted by a panel of 3 to 5 staff members who would look at a range of things. They would, first of all, the young person has to be either a current Centrepoint resident or an ex-Centrepoint resident, or one of the young people who've come to us through one of those non-selective routes. So that's the first thing. The second one is that the young person has to demonstrate, and they can be supported by their key workers through this process. They have to demonstrate that attending university is financially viable for them. Now, that sounds like an oxymoron, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The third criterion is that they have to have been engaging positively with the services that Centrepoint has offered them. So we know that they can engage and they know how to look after themselves. And finally, the fourth one is that they are committed, they have to show that they're committed to this next stage of their education journey. If they get ticked off on each of those 4 criteria, then yeah, the application will be successful and it is approved provisionally until they get their university confirmation. So they get confirmation of their university place, and then the money is paid to them quarterly. When they get that confirmation, we actually have someone who we employ, well, not someone, we have people who we employ who are money-wise advisors, who would actually sit with them and help them to walk through, discuss their finances, their budgets, their loans, how they will manage it, the scholarship they get in, and how that comes into play for them. And then that bursary is just paid to them quarterly. Now, let me go back to that one that I described as an oxymoron. We're looking at whether or not a young person can demonstrate that going to university is financially viable for them. The reason that really is important is we know that sometimes young people already have accumulated quite a bit of debt. And we know that if they go on with that debt, alongside them, actually, our experience is that that's a risk that they then end up backsliding and they don't carry on that journey. So actually, we want to ensure that they are in the right place before they actually go. So when we turn an application down on that basis, it's not that we're saying, don't go to university. What we are saying is actually, let's help you to get you ready so that you can actually make a success of going. That's what I mean by that bit, that one about financial viability.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you, Seyi. Our next question comes from Hugh. He references the fact that some young people that Centrepoint support have the potential to be aggressive. Could you talk to us about how you deal with those scenarios in terms of the respect that Centrepoint shows to those individuals and how we manage that sort of behaviour in terms of our services that we offer?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. One of my colleagues who run one of our services in South London once said to me that he has never seen an irredeemably bad young person, but he has seen lots of young people who've been badly let down. And he was speaking as someone who was a homeless young person himself. So I think that the starting point for us in dealing with this actually is first and foremost to establish a proactive, positive relationship with the young person from the start. And that means you have to invest in that relationship. When young people arrive, it is unsurprising that for us, they come with, the baggage of the interactions that they have had previously with authority figures in their lives. And many of that experience has not been positive. So many of them have learned to distrust authority. We have to break that down. And we have to earn their trust. And that's why it's important right at the beginning to invest in building that sort of positive relationship, because we know that that will help us with the journey long further down the line. And if we get that engagement right at the beginning, the respect is there between us and the young person. The young person learns to trust us, doesn't see us as the authority they knew before, but actually as someone who's working alongside them to help them. That helps us to avoid this difficulty with aggressive behavior further down the line. Now, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that that means we can avoid aggressive behavior altogether. After all, we're dealing with vulnerable young people. We're dealing with young people, some of whom have learned in the past that this is the way that they get on. So you can't completely eliminate it. And that is why our investment in developing what we describe as a psychologically informed environment is really important to us. And we are training our people, our staff, to work in this psychologically informed way. And it isn't just about staff who work with young people, it is about our whole organization. Because what that means is that when a young person is behaving in ways that we don't expect, we don't judge that behavior. We seek to look beyond that behavior to why they are behaving in that way, so that we can, together with them, tackle that why. Why are they acting that way? And if we can understand that, and often young people don't know that themselves, if we put that back to young people, we can actually help them to behave more positively. And believe me, it works. It is innovative, but it works because it helps to bring down the incidences of those aggressive behaviors. And that's why we don't end up evicting many young people ourselves compared to many organizations, other organizations who work in this space. So our approach, of course we have rules, but our approach is not to follow those rules in a dogmatic way, but actually to start with what's going on here. Can we understand why is this young person behaving this way? Can we help them to understand why they're behaving in that way? And then can we help them to tackle whatever it is that is the cause of them behaving in that sort of way?
That's helpful, Seyi. And I suppose it's worth me just adding that part of Centrepoint's provision is mental health support, isn't it, Seyi? So young people have proactive psychotherapy to help manage some of those challenges that they face. That's great, thank you. A question now from David about the hotels that we used during the pandemic. We know they got a lot of media coverage, and a lot of rough sleepers in particular were housed in the hotels. David's question is around whether we know what's happened to those people now, and have the hotels now reverted to commercial use again?
I'm afraid that is not an entirely positive story. So the government set about the intention was that those people who are housed in the hotels would not have to return to the streets, and they could go off into accommodation. But the problem is the accommodation is not there. So in the immediate, what the government did is, where possible, to extend the stay in those hotels. And actually, the government did manage to rehouse quite a lot of those people who are in hotels. But I'm afraid the truth is not all of them were rehoused. And I think the story has become even more complicated now because there are more people who are becoming homeless. So there's that initial snapshot of dealing with people and helping them into those hotels. But what hasn't happened is they follow through with the newly homeless who are just coming into the streets. And sadly, there hasn't actually been enough funding to support, those people. In London, for instance, the GLA has said that they need roughly £28 million to rehouse all those who either are still stuck in the hotels or are newly homeless. They've got 19 million. So that's about 2/3 of the funding that is needed. So that's an ongoing challenge for homeless people in general. For young people, thankfully, there hasn't been that many young people in that cohort. And so we have been able to accommodate all young people who were street homeless in hostels, insofar as I know today. Of course, because homelessness is happening all the time, you can have a frictional experience. But that's why it has been really important for us to set out at the beginning that our objective is to ensure that our services remain open and that young people can access the offer that we have, whether they're doing that because they're working in directly, or whether they're doing it because they are approaching us through local authorities, or whether they're doing it because we are referring them to the local authorities to approach us that way. But that provision is there. And I'm really proud to say that every single one of our services remained open throughout the crisis. And we've committed to stepping up and supporting young people as effectively as we can. And we've done it well in these last few months, and long may it continue. Challenging, but long may it continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Seyi. The next question focuses on the amount of money that we invest in fundraising, Seyi, as an organisation. And this is from David. And David, thank you for your prompt around transparency. We will make sure that we talk about this more in the next issue of our annual report and accounts, so that we are fully transparent about our investment in fundraising. But Seyi, could you just talk to us about why we invest in fundraising and why the figures are as they are? That would be great.
So I will take you back on that to probably 10 years ago, when we decided that, or maybe a bit longer than that actually, that the outcome we wanted for young people is for a job and a home. And in order to secure that outcome, we know that we must invest resources in helping young people to get healthy and stay healthy. We must invest resources in helping young people to gain skills that they need, whether that is for vocational training and apprenticeships and things like that, or whether it is actually to pass exams and go on to universities. We know we must invest in mental health services and so on and so forth. And we knew that in order to do that, we had to raise money. We couldn't depend on the government to give us that money. Actually, that has turned out to be the case. And to raise money, we have to invest to persuade people to support Centrepoint, and to do that in a sustainable way, and in a way that ensures that there is, what I mean by sustainability is that there is some stability in that funding, so that we can also offer that stability to young people for whom their journey has been unstable. Now, just in terms of the way that we then account for that, the investment we make is continuous. But the way that the accounting rule works means that we have to record that investment in the year in which we make it, even though the benefit of that investment is for many years to come. So that can feel rather lumpy, particularly in the years in which we make the investment. So actually, the way that we seek then to assure ourselves that we're doing the right thing is to focus on the return on investment that we get from the different streams by which we raise money. And I'm delighted that in those 10-year period that I've talked about, our net fundraising has increased 400% from 2 million to 10 million last year. So we are keen to carry on doing that, but also to carry on mixing the portfolio. Unlike many other charities, we, Centrepoint, doesn't benefit yet. We will in future. We don't benefit yet significantly from legacy income. And that's a stream of fundraising where the return on investment is considerable, is high. So we are investing some resource now in inviting people to remember us in their wills. We won't get any income from that now, but we will get income from it in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. So some of the investment we're making today is for the long-term sustainability of Centrepoint. Now that investment does come under what I can describe as stringent scrutiny by our trustees, who want to know that we are spending donor money wisely all the time. And so our trustees not only look at what we are doing in that space every time they meet, our audit committee dives even deeper into it to ensure that our procurement is always in line with our procurement rules, and it is value for money, represents value for money. So it is a challenge for us to retain sustainability in that profile. We're working all the time to bring the costs down, but at the same time, we are investing for the future.
Great, thank you so much, Seyi. Appreciate it. I think that differentiation between that short-term and long-term view is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're now moving on to some questions that have already been posed today, Seyi. The first up talks about Birmingham, actually, and about whether we are going to be opening a service in Birmingham anytime soon. There is a huge demand in Birmingham, and so presumably somebody locally based in the Midlands.
We are open to opening services in Birmingham, but one of the things that we are careful about, and that's not just about Birmingham, is across the country, is not to duplicate provision if it already exists, but to support that provision and work in partnership with others who are doing that. So we do have an office, interestingly, in Birmingham, where we manage a whole range of these partnerships that we have right across the country. We work with an organization in Birmingham in partnership that is called St. Basil's, who offer good services for young people in that area. And we support, we work with them and we support them to ensure that the service that they do offer can help young people in that area. We are, as I say, open to opening services ourselves where there are gaps in provision.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Seyi. I don't know if you want to, obviously we talked briefly earlier about the future vision for Centrepoint. One of the questions has asked for more on that. Did you want to share that now, Seyi, or should we answer that by email in due course?
I'm quite happy to share that. We are, it's a very topical issue because we are actually in the process now of defining our strategy for the next 5 years, starting from next year. My view, as I said before, is that youth homelessness is not inevitable. I believe it is possible for us to eradicate it. And indeed, now as we reflect on Centrepoint Life beyond next year, it is what I would like us to aim for. Now, I think that it can actually be done relatively quickly. Now, please don't laugh at me. I know that it will only happen if we were able to corral collective action and if we have the political will to make it happen. So when I say youth homelessness can be eradicated, I'm thinking, is it possible that a young person that is born in 2021 will not need a Centrepoint hostel in the way that it is set up today when they are 16, which is the entry age for us? That gives us 16 years. And I think that's relatively quick. But to succeed, I think we have to first define what we mean by eradicating youth homelessness. I believe that what that means is not that no one ever becomes homelessness, but we can define, we can corral, we can animate a society in which no young person becomes homeless for a length of time. We can reduce youth homelessness to what I describe as functional zero, frictionless homelessness. For us to succeed, there are three things I think need to happen. The first one is there has to be a substantial reduction in that 110,000 number that I spoke about earlier on. I believe it is possible for there to be that sort of substantial reduction. Because look, we know what the triggers of youth homelessness are. We know them: family breakdown, leaving an institution, leaving care, ending a tenancy, domestic abuse, breakdown of a relationship, harassment, 7 things. Those 7 things drive youth homelessness. And I don't think any of those 7 is insurmountable. So I do believe we can reduce significantly the number of young people who ever face homelessness to a frictional number, to what I'm describing as functional zero. And then the second thing that needs to happen is, for those who fall through that crack, we can surely devise a system that picks them up quickly and individually. We can assemble comprehensive, detailed, real-time, and by name data. So we know who they are, and we can then help each one of them to tackle whatever the issue is for them whether it be about their physical or their mental health, or whether it be about their skills or whatever it is, so that they can in turn move on from that experience very, very quickly. And then the third thing that needs to happen is that we need to have a whole raft of these independent living options for young people that they can afford. I am determined that in the next 2 or 3 years, we, Centrepoint, will prove that there is a model that is affordable by which young people can have the opportunity to live independently. Look, if we do those 3 things, by 2037, youth homelessness is gone. That is the future that I see for Centrepoint.
Great, and what an inspiring and huge ambition to have. It's absolutely great. I'm conscious that we are rapidly drawing to our timeline. Shay, we have huge numbers of questions this end for you. I apologise that we won't be able to answer them all on this session. I'm going to pick a couple more for us to answer in this session, and then we will answer the rest by email. I'm sorry we haven't managed to answer them all live. The next question is from Mark Petterson. He asks for an update, please, on the independent living programme. Shay.
Mark, thank you. I am incredibly passionate about independent living, just as you are. The first service is open, as you know, opened last November. We have had a bit of slowdown because of the pandemic. We are currently working on the second service in Huxley Road. I'm hoping that will open before the end of April next year. And we are, touch wood, finally going into the planning committee in Southwark in a couple of weeks, actually. And if we get permission there, we will build a 33-block unit that will be open for accommodation on the 1st of April next year. In Lugard Road in London. So we are rolling out. We have a pipeline building now that I'm excited about. But I must be honest with you, planning has been challenging for us so far, just to get through the planning process, because what we are trying to do here is really innovative, and it isn't anything that fits neatly into the standard boxes that planners have used. So we've had to persuade not just the planners, but other people, other stakeholders in the local authority, that this is a good provision for young people who either have been homeless or at risk of homelessness, and they will live independently. They will pay, actually in the Lugard Road scheme, 1/3 of their income in rents. They will have 5 years to establish themselves in their careers. I'm excited about it. And I really pray and hope that our planning application comes through successfully in a couple of weeks. I might pick that up with you, Mark.
Thank you, Shay. Right, I'm just going to address our final question for this session, and it's around, Shay, the challenges of young people finding employment in the current environment. Richard, thank you for your question. Shay, can you just comment on your thoughts around youth unemployment and what Centrepoint can do in that space?
Youth unemployment has for many years been worse than adult employment. Before the pandemic, whereas adult employment was roughly 3 to 4%, youth unemployment was around 10 to 11%. That's worse now. It's worse because if you think about the sorts of employment that is the first rung for young people, there are also this sort of employment that are being shut down by the pandemic: retail, hospitality, catering. All those things are areas where young people take their first steps into employment, and they've been shut down. So youth unemployment, I'm afraid, is worse, and is likely to get worse the more the economy shuts down. What can we do about it? we can encourage, and we are encouraging young people to think about broadening their horizon, and then to help them to get training around other areas where there might be opportunities for them for the future. For our young people particularly, helping them to gain the skills that they need has never been more important. It's never been more critical, because if they don't gain those skills, they will be left behind. So we are intensifying our efforts around functional skills, helping young people to get their heads around that, and around vocational training, looking at what the options are. The government announced a Kickstart scheme for young people. We want to take the opportunity that offers to actually begin to give young people the sort of experience that they need, so they too have something on their CVs and they can compete effectively when opportunities arise. I have no doubt that it will be a rough time for young people coming forward, and we will be doing the very best we can to help them navigate their way through these challenges.
I think that's a absolutely great note for us to finish on, Seyi. I'm conscious that we have lots of questions we've been unable to answer, but I will ask Seyi now on the fly if he's willing to host another talking point to make sure we do answer more questions going forward.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we will certainly answer by email those questions that have come through that we've been unable to answer. I'm so delighted you were able to join us today. Thank you for engaging so much in this session. Seyi, thank you so much for your time as well. And for all our supporters, hugely grateful for your support. Thank you. We are enormously grateful. I look forward to seeing you on another talking point shortly and soon. Take care, everybody, and have a good rest of day.
Thank you all.